Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to take a look at the Sony WH-1000XM4. This is a closed-back over-ear wireless headphone that's also got noise-canceling functionality built in, along with a ton of other features, and it comes in right at around $350. So let's take a look. As usual, I will have published my full written review along with a series of measurements that have been done of this headphone on the Gross standardized measurement rig on headphones.com, and I'll leave a link in the description for anybody who wants to take a closer look at those. For this review, I'm going to talk about build quality, design and comfort, detail retrieval, speed, dynamics, soundstage, imaging, and timbre. I'm going to go over the frequency response and then give some comparisons. And I'm also going to talk about EQ with this headphone because it's actually built into the app that you can use. And there are a number of different EQ presets there, and I have actually been able to measure those as well. And I'm also going to give my own custom EQ setting for this, so stick around to the end of the video if you want to see that. But let me just quickly begin by talking about some of the XM4's features. I think they border a little bit on gimmicky, but I do find myself appreciating a number of them. Obviously, the noise canceling is the reason most people are buying this, and it is fantastic on this headphone. It's probably the best noise canceling I've ever heard. The Bluetooth functionality, the wireless functionality works great, and it's actually the preferred way to use this. I don't actually recommend using the 3.5mm cable that comes with it. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about frequency response. And then, of course, you can pair this with multiple devices at the same time. I really like that feature because it allows me to pair it with my phone and my computer at the same time. And then, interestingly enough, you can actually change the EQ presets in the software on the phone, in the phone app, and then it'll also retain that EQ preset when you're using it on your computer. So it doesn't change your EQ profile at all, depending on the device that you have it paired with or that you're using it with. There are a couple of other interesting features as well. For example, when you're wearing this and then you take the headphones off, there's a sensor in here that can sense when it's on your head, and it will pause the music that you're listening to. And then when you put it back on, it'll resume the music, so you don't miss what's going on in your track if you quickly need to take it off and have a conversation. And then also it has this cool functionality where, say you're listening like this, and then you hold on the side of it like this, then it will, it'll reduce the volume of the music that you're listening to, so you can actually speak to somebody just quickly without taking the headphones off. And like I said, the noise canceling function here is actually the best that I've ever heard. There's very little background hiss, or usually what happens with noise canceling is you get two issues. One of them is that you still get a little bit of noise floor there, even though it might be canceling out, the sounds of like air conditioners or street noise or whatever else. You still get a little bit of noise floor there just by default. And with this one, it's very minimal. It's still there, but it's like the lowest that I've ever heard. Really, really good. And the second issue is that when you use the noise canceling feature, usually on most noise canceling headphones, there's this somewhat kind of like a noise canceling burble that shows up in the treble. And it's there for this, but it's also possibly the best that I've ever heard. This is like the least affected by the noise canceling, at least for its sound quality that I've heard for a noise canceling headphone. Like, this is better than like the AirPods Pro that I reviewed, last year. They came up and they did a great job there, but I think this is even better. But that's all to do just with the features that this has, which, yes, I recognize is what most people are buying this for. But let's talk about the rest of the headphone. So for build quality, design, and comfort, I really like this. I do find that because the pads are quite small, it does, my ears do touch them. So maybe it's just my ears that are the problem and not actually with the headphone, because the cool thing is that it's not round. It is actually more of an oval shape to the pads. And then the pads here are really soft and cushiony. I like this a lot. It's, sometimes you get pads that are like really stiff and springy, and this is like the opposite of that. They have such an easy time, just sort of like perfectly contouring to the side of your head. So the comfort is great. The weight is also quite low on these. And so, yeah, I have no problem, wearing this for most of the day, apart from the fact that my ears touch a little bit on the pads. So it doesn't perfectly go around my ear. It kind of scrunches a little bit. That's not a problem. The look, again, I think it looks great. I would have preferred the look of the black one, but they were out of stock at the time, so I went with this one. And this one looks fine as well, in my opinion. You do also get an impressive range for a cup swivel here. So this actually folds flat like this if you want it to. And then you get some extension to the arms like this. And so it fits my head reasonably well, and it's not difficult to get a good fit either. Now, let's talk about how this sounds. Remembering, of course, that this is a consumer-oriented device. This is a noise-canceling wireless closed-back headphone that's quite small and not, you know, the high-end audiophile headphones that use an amp and a DAC and everything. You know, this is much more about the features than it is about the sound quality. But speaking of which, the detail retrieval of this headphone is not particularly good. And again, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by that. I like to use the window analogy that, you know, if you're looking through a smeared or opaque window, you can still make out the details, but it's not as clear as if the window is perfectly transparent. And with the XM4, unfortunately, it's not particularly transparent. Especially during busy passages, things tend to kind of bleed together a little bit, so that's not really that great. And if you compare this to the similarly priced Audeze Mobius here, the Mobius has far superior detail retrieval. I mean, this demonstrates that, yeah, I mean, at this price, you should be able to get better detail retrieval, even for these sort of feature-rich closed-back headphones like these two here. But remember, of course, that the Mobius is a planar magnetic headphone and the XM4 uses a dynamic driver, and the XM4 is also much lighter. In any case, moving on to speed and dynamics, speed is actually the weakest point of this headphone, in my opinion. This is a somewhat sluggish sounding headphone, especially in the bass. It's not exactly helped by its frequency response there, but we'll get to that. Audiophiles like myself, we like to talk about sort of the immediacy of the initial leading edge and how, you know, tight and controlled and well defined that makes everything sound, how engaging everything sounds. And, you know, this is sort of the absence of that. If you compare this with, again, it's an unfair comparison, but the much less expensive Drop HD6XX, which is an open back headphone, you know, it really goes to show the difference in terms of speed between something like that and something like this. And similarly, if you compare this with the Audeze Mobius, the Mobius is a much faster and tighter and more well-controlled headphone, while this just sort of, yeah, it just sort of flubs along there, unfortunately. So for both detail and speed, it's not a particularly engaging headphone, but it does actually have surprisingly decent dynamics. It actually has a decent amount of punch and slam to it. Again, not the best. I've definitely heard better even at this price. I'm thinking of, you know, some of those Fostex like the TR-X00, although I think a lot of those are discontinued now or sold out. But, you know, some of those, you know, Fostex driver headphones that you can maybe find on the used market do punch harder than this. Still, I find this to have a decent amount of punch there. And once again, this isn't actually something that's helped by the frequency response of this headphone. It's not like the bass is all that distinct. So, you know, when you EQ this to be similar to like other, you know, normal headphones, this does still retain some of the dynamics there. So that's a good thing. And then for soundstage and imaging, I was pleasantly surprised that the soundstage here doesn't sound super claustrophobic and closed in. It's not super spacious and wide or anything. And the imaging, again, the image separation isn't the greatest here either. Again, it's better image separation on the Mobius, but the overall sense of space on the XM4 is better than the Mobius to my ear. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by that quality going on here. And then for timbre, I didn't really have any issues with this, at least not for, you know, material or transducer related timbre. But because this is an active noise canceling headphone and you do still hear that very subtle kind of slight noise floor there when the ANC is turned on, and then it does still have that very minor, again, probably best in class noise canceling, but it still has that minor you know, ANC burble in, you know, the treble occasionally. This still has that somewhat digital presentation to it, which I don't think there's any way around that for noise canceling headphones. It's just that it means that it's not the most natural sounding headphone when you compare it to a wired non-noise canceling closed back headphone. And then importantly for frequency response related timbre, you do notice a slight shift in the overall tonal balance for certain things. In particular, cymbals are a little bit shifted there, but it's actually not too bad for frequency response related timbre. However, the overall frequency response and tonal balance for this headphone is not particularly good. It sounds quite congested and muffled and compressed. Yeah, so let's talk about frequency response next. So the first thing I want to mention with frequency response is that I actually did measure this with the 3.5mm connection that plugs into the bottom here, and then I did run it just off of a regular amplifier, and then I also measured it using its wireless functionality, and it did change a little bit, and then of course I had to measure it as well with the different EQ presets that exist in the software. And what I noticed when I measured this with the 3.5mm connection is that there's a significant channel imbalance. And actually, I found that this channel imbalance was audible as well. And I think there's a reason for that. If you look at the cups here, there's a sensor on the inside here. And again, this is the sensor, I believe this is the sensor for, you know, when you take it off your head and put it back on for it to, you know, pause and resume playback. The fact that this is asymmetrical, it's going to introduce significant acoustic challenges for getting the sound to be even on both sides. And so I almost don't really expect it to have perfect channel balance for the 3.5 millimeter mode. So the analog mode. And I found a similar thing for the Audeze Mobius as well. You know, there's so many electronics going on inside the cups for these, you know, wireless feature-rich headphones that it's unsurprising to me that they wouldn't have the best channel balance, but it's quite noticeably bad on the XM4 using the analog connection. And then when you use this with Bluetooth or wireless, it did improve a little bit. And that makes me think that they are actively correcting for this when you use the built-in DAC amp or whatever they're using in here. It's likely they're using some DSP to be able to correct for that, which makes a certain amount of sense. However, the overall frequency response, like I mentioned for this headphone, is particularly bad. And I'll explain why. So the biggest issue with this headphone in my mind is the region between 100 Hertz and like 300 Hertz, where there is a substantial bleed from the bass into the mid-range. Now, I don't want to make this sound like there's too much bass. I mean, this is a consumer-oriented headphone. It's fine that there's lots of bass. That's not the problem. The bass, the overall bass level here is just a little bit north of actually the 2018 Harman target. This one here is the combined one with the 2013 bass, but it's just a little bit north, you know, for the sub bass and mid bass. But, you know, between 100 and 200, 250 Hertz, it's just too elevated, and it makes everything sound muddy and thick, and just it's overbearing and too much in that region. And then there's this substantial sort of V shape to the whole thing. Again, this is using the default tonality, where the mids are quite a bit recessed relative to the target. If you guys want to learn more about this, check out one of the links there. I've actually updated an article on how to read measurements and, you know, what all this stuff means. So if you're looking at this and you're like, what is he talking about? Check out one of the links in the description there for measurements and frequency response for a bit of an overview for this. Yeah, so in the mids and upper mids, it's significantly recessed. There is some pinna gain, but it's shifted to the upper side, and this means that you don't get the fundamental as strongly for, you know, a lot of your mid-range, a lot of your instruments that token mid-range frequencies, and instead you get sort of the upper resonance of them only. It's not the worst in the world because it does still elevate at the place where your ear is amplifying, you know, frequencies. It's just it doesn't do it early enough, in my opinion. And then the biggest problem is this 5 to 6K hertz, like 5 to 5.5K hertz peak, that this comes through particularly aggressively on a lot of recordings. Not all, but many recordings, this is a problem. The rest of the treble here, you know, like above 7K hertz is actually pretty good. There's no, you know, significant sibilance issue at 8K hertz. I think this dip here around 9K hertz, I wish that was extended a little further to like 10K hertz, because once again, I do hear a little bit of that sort of shimmering quality creeping in there at 10K hertz with a little bit of elevation. This could also just be for some positions. You'll notice there's a little bit of positional variance going on here at 10K hertz. So it could be worse in some positions, like forward or backward, and better in others. But in general, yeah, this is a boomy yet still aggressive sounding headphone, being extremely V-shaped. I think the main point of this is, you know, for people who they might go into a store and put this on, and this is a tuning that's meant to sort of grab people's attention, but then you know, I wouldn't really want to listen to this kind of tuning for a long period of time. But keep in mind, that's just the default setting here, with all the EQ turned off. And when you use the software, you have a number of different presets there that will change the sound. The vocal preset is actually one of the better ones, in spite of the fact that, yes, it is missing still quite a bit of the mids and upper mids. It's just better than this default crazy bass shelf that they got going on. And then, you know, they have a number of other ones here. This is the excited one, which is also particularly bad. This just makes the bass shelf worse. Actually, I should note, this makes the bass a little bit more distinct, not just because it's more elevated, but because it comes down a little earlier. You know, I just think this bass shelf shelf is nuts with the bass, or with the excited one. And it makes the 5 to 6K hertz peak even worse. They call this one their bright preset. That's the blue line here. And this actually isn't too bad. It's really bad in the 5 to 5.5K hertz region. This is just sort of a feature of this headphone consistently across the board. But, you know, it brings a lot of the rest of the bass in line a little bit more. Again, it's not elevated in the right spots here, and it's elevated in probably the wrong spot, but this does curb the bass. I think overall, either the bright or the vocal tuning would be the better choices over the default one. But they still have some issues of their own. And there are a number of other presets like mellow and relaxed and whatnot, but they're also all pretty bad because they don't really fix the things that should be fixed. And so that's why I recommend, if you're going to get these headphones, go with the custom preset and then just make your own. And I'll show you what I was able to do with this. It's not perfect because it doesn't really allow you as much control as ideally you should have with this, because it only gives you a filter for 400 hertz, and then it gives you some filters in the mids, and then it gives you one at 16K. It also doesn't really give you much control beyond that. In theory, it is possible to go negative on the clear bass slider in the app software, and this does reduce the bass, but unfortunately that only reduces like 80 hertz and below. It doesn't actually reduce anything from 100 to 200 hertz, which is where the problem area lies. And that's once again why I use equalizer APO instead. Still, using that custom filter, I was able to bring some of the bass down a little bit. It's still too much here. Like, this should come down at like 120, 150 hertz instead of being elevated here. But yeah, I was able to boost 1K and 2.5K hertz to get the mids back in line. And this does make a significant difference. This helps a lot. So if you're just going to be using this on the go and you don't mind the bass bleeding into the mids, then I recommend using this preset. And it makes it so that, you know, yes, the 5K hertz problem is still there, but it's not as bad, you know, because now the rest of the mids are filled in a little bit. So the overall balance is just a little bit better. And then I wanted to also show you, I did do my own EQ for this, and I want to show you just how this measures after EQ using the custom one with equalizer APO. That's the yellow or orange line here. So yeah, I kept the bass shelf a little bit, but I brought it down at an appropriate spot, you know, just at around 120 hertz, and then brought the mids in line. And then tried to curb some of this, you know, 5 to 6K hertz energy here. Just overall, this sounds so much more balanced to me. And again, I probably would have preferred it with even less bass, because remember, this already has a bass shelf here in the target. So it's like a bass shelf on top of already a bass shelf. Recognizing that this is a consumer-oriented product where people are probably going to be looking more for bass and treble, I kind of tried to keep a little bit of that intact with, you know, maybe lining this up a little bit more closely with the 2018 Harman bass shelf, which is a little bit more emphasized. But the big change here was, you know, getting rid of this crazy 100 to 200 hertz issue. And that helped a lot. And then filling in the mid-range, which I recommend everybody try. I'll have added that to the full written review as well. So if you guys want to do a deep dive and EQ this yourself, check out that preset, because that's also probably a good starting point for this. Now, let me give a comparison here between the XM4 and the Audeze Mobius. Unfortunately, I don't have the XM3 on hand to do that comparison, or the Bose QC35, or the new one, the 700. But when talking strictly sound quality and not necessarily for the noise canceling functionality, you know, the Audeze Mobius is clearly better. This is better as far as both its frequency response is concerned and its technical performance. So the detail retrieval on the Mobius is far better. The image separation is far better as well. For all the things that really matter for sound quality, the Audeze Mobius is just far superior. It's a little bit heavier than the XM4, and then obviously you don't get noise canceling, but the comfort is decent here. I wouldn't use the head tracking functionality here. It's not my kind of thing at all. Maybe it is for you guys. But as far as these sort of like feature-rich closed-back wireless headphones go, I definitely prefer the Audeze Mobius. To me, it's just a much better sounding headphone if you can get away without noise canceling. Because again, I think that's the biggest feature that the Sony does right. If you're going to be getting a noise canceling headphone for noise canceling, the Sony one is probably the way to go, because its noise canceling functionality is so darn good. And if you just want a wireless closed back headphone that's going to sound great, then I recommend the Mobius instead. But But of course, it also depends on what your use case is, and you know, are you going to be out and about? Are you going to be sitting at your desk? You know, these types of considerations I think matter. I think this is again aimed more at multimedia use, and you know, for all of its software and features and whatnot, while the XM4 is aimed a little bit more towards the average consumer just walking, you know, outside paired with their smartphone or something like that. And for that purpose, I actually think that the XM4 here is probably the better choice, just because of how good the noise canceling functionality is here. But let me just give a conclusion here. Do I recommend the Sony XM4? Well, again, I think if noise canceling is something that you're after and you want the best noise canceling, then yeah, I recommend this. A lot of its features are gimmicks. Its sound quality is not particularly good. You can EQ it, and the software is really cool for what you're able to do with that, you know, pairing it to multiple devices at the same time. So, you know, if that's all you care about, if you don't care about sound quality, yeah, I absolutely recommend this, because the noise canceling, I mean, I just have to say, like, you know, if you're in any environment where there's some kind of noise floor, the noise canceling functionality here may give you a better, you know, picture of the music, because you're not competing with all the various different noises going on around you. But at the same time, I think it's worth considering how significant that is for you, because if all you're really competing with for noise floor is like a computer fan or like an air conditioner, a regular, you know, closed back headphone will be able to eliminate that noise floor to the same or a sufficient degree. But if somebody's running a lawnmower next to you outside, or you know, there's city noises and street sounds all around, yeah, then this is going to be a better choice, because that noise canceling feature is becoming all that more significant to you. I think most people who are just sitting at their computers working away probably don't need the noise canceling, and a regular closed back headphone would do, in which case, you know, there's a lot of other options out there that are a lot less expensive that would be better than this. Going with a more traditional closed back wired setup at half the price is going to end up yielding better sound quality in those environments. In any case, that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.